Hey, what's going on, guys? It's me, Trade Man, and welcome back. Or welcome to, what is this place? It's Pebble something. It's on the narrow gauge division of the Iron Horseman Railroad. Pebble Creek, there we go. Anyways, this week for our run session, nobody gave me a route, so we're not critiquing a route, we're not doing too much. I'm just going to continue with my stories. Although I may stop to point out some things about this route as we go through. You know, we'll be venturing back in time, basically, because this route was built over the period of 2.5 years by our very own Brett Wiebold, and is now serving duty as the narrow gauge division on the Iron Horseman Railroad. Anyways, so this took about 40 minutes to run from here to the town in the middle. Don't know what it's called, but it's in the middle. It took about 40 minutes to do this run, and in that I cut it down to about 25, as you can see. So I think we're going to continue. I think in that 25 minutes I can cover basically our greatest heist yet. On what would be the date exactly? It was a few days before the 26th, so maybe the 23rd or the 20th even. I returned to Quonset Point and met with the leader of the new Republic of Block Island, because there was a dilemma. The dilemma was their fuel is running low, and the fuel in question was taken from a couple of very large tanks in are very close to Providence, Rhode Island. They're sort of off. They're not offshore. They're onshore tanks. And this fuel was running low, so they had run into they had come up with this plan largely without my input. So I'm just going to cover what I heard when I got there. So they had ran into a couple of people with a dredger, and with this dredger they were able to dredge out New Harbor, which is inside of the Great Salt Pond in Block Island. I will point out that Block Island was exceptionally lucky in the Great Panic, where they didn't see any zombies until a long while after. Those zombies that managed to walk along the seafloor for whatever this distance is, for 10 miles to eventually surface in Block Island, were quickly dealt with because they were few and far between, and none, thankfully, ever came on the boats. They were pretty paranoid, to be honest. Thankfully, the Block Island ferry being the only way in other than personal ships, meant that they could have a pretty tough handle on who was coming in and who wasn't. I mean, a lot of people tried to make it via sailboats, but you know, it's kind of hit or miss with that. People in their panic would get blown off course, would capsize, things like that. A lot of people did not survive their own attempts to get out there, but the people that were out there sort of they made do, and they made do well. The problem was that their supply of fresh water and their supply of pretty much everything else came from the mainland. And with the MV Block Island, their last ferry in service, running out of fuel, they were about to, be completely unable to get anything at all, and then the new Republic of Block Island would vanish. So they were dredging out New Harbor, and I was asking them why they were doing that if they weren't going to get, if the problem was they didn't have a boat. And the answer was, we were going to get a boat. And I said, what? And they said, the Constitution. I was impressed by this notion, and frankly, I was very excited by the prospect. There were a few problems. One of which being that the Constitution was in Boston, and, everything that entails. The other being that the Constitution itself well, it was too tall for the routes they wanted to take it back via, and that would be through the Cape Cod Canal. The bridge there has a maximum height of 135, which is fine for some sailboats, but is not great for a tall ship the size of the Constitution. So we were in a tight spot there, and so the answer was they're going to go up there, they're going to take the masts off, for the most part, because you can do that. They take the masts off. They took them off when they put them into dry dock recently, and then they'll put them back on once they get south of the canal, because going around the tip of Cape Cod is dangerous. And there was a little reporting station there out in Provincetown, which is at the tip of the Cape, and they were doing some weather monitoring and some things like that. They were making their own living and contacting other people via radio. About a day before the operation was slated to begin, the wind was blowing from the north, or it was blowing from the northwest. That means it's blowing southeast, and they received an anomalous radio signal. They didn't, say what it was. They didn't know what it was, but they figured it was a ship. And based on lack of response, they figured it was not Navy. It wasn't something related to the U.S. Navy or, Yonkers in any way. Keep in mind, this is about 8 months after Yonkers, but it was still pretty fresh in people's minds. So the plan was take the train up to Boston, obviously. Take the zombie train up to Boston with all the personnel they needed to get Constitution, get it out of there, bring the MV Block Island in via the Cape Cod Canal, and tow the Constitution out through the canal and to Block Island, where they had made it deep enough to park the Constitution. This was done in 2 rounds. The first one was a hit-and-run zombie attraction thing, which was done before dawn on the 26th of March, 2014. We brought the train into South Station, we blew the whistle, we accumulated a lot of zombies hanging out, we fired some guns, fired off some fireworks. Basically anything to attract their attention. It was dark, we made light, and then we drove the train west. And we drove it west, we drove it to Framingham, and then we turned it southwards. We did not want to go as far as Worcester, despite the fact that Worcester was, well, fairly defunct at that point. I hadn't heard from them in a long time, and I was actually wondering if there was anyone still alive in Worcester. But we brought it into Framingham, we turned the train around, we ran it back to Quonset, which was a couple of hours. We put on a bunch of people, mostly people who were familiar with tall ships and sailing and whatnot, and brought them back to Boston, which was, at this point, largely devoid of zombies. Now, a couple of hours went by, we worked into the dawn, we worked into the morning light. We got the masts off and down. That was a thing and a half, because it meant commandeering one of the dockside cranes. What we did was we flooded the dry dock, dry dock number 1. We maneuvered the Constitution in there with basically some boats that were just around. We used the crane to pull the masts off, set them down on the Constitution, pulled it out, and then waited for the MV Block Island to show up. I wasn't commanding this operation, but I was a very large part of it. I helped a lot, and my people were big helps as well. Towards noon, however, most everyone had headed back to the train except for myself, and I'm not sure if there's an and on that one. I don't think anyone else was up at the Constitution with me. I was going to head back on my own, despite, the buddy system being a thing. I just sort of sent everyone back, because we were worried about the zombies returning, because we had seen a couple of them around, and it was, it was getting a little bit hairy. I gave them an order. People didn't like it, but they obeyed it. They went back to the train, got it ready to leave. We were back into the South Station, so we were all set to just, gun it out of there. MV Block Island shows up at about quarter of noon, or, 11:30, or quarter of noon. Now, sun's high in the sky, clear skies, wind is transitioning from a southeasterly direction to a southerly direction. Again, this doesn't matter to us, but it'll matter in a second, and you'll see why. When we got the thing towed, we got it out of Boston Harbor, we got it out into the, the open ocean, really, like Cape Cod Bay, or, well, north of it, really. I guess that's all the Gulf of Maine. I don't know. But we got it out there and we started pulling it southward. And it was being fairly cooperative. We were pulling at about 10 knots. Because that is below the normal operable maximum for the Constitution, which is about 13 knots. And it is well below the MV Block Island's maximum of 16.5 knots. We were about 15 minutes out of Boston Harbor when we saw something on the horizon, and this is when we get another radio call from the guys at Provincetown saying it's definitely a ship, and we're fairly certain by, our lookouts, it appears to be a sailing ship, a warship of some kind. It turned out to be the Trincomalee, which is a British ship. It is significantly smaller than the Constitution, but it can pack about the same amount of guns. Here's the thing. The thing with ships, or warships of this era, they swapped around guns whenever. That actually wasn't where I was going with that. There were replica guns on the Constitution. They're not originals. I thought this meant they couldn't fire. I was wrong. They can fire. They just don't have a good supply of ammunition and cannonballs, which was one of the things we were working on because apparently we needed to fire them? I don't know. That was beyond me. I didn't think anyone else was gunning for this ship in such a way that the Britons were, is what we ended up calling them. But they came in with the Trincomalee, and they radioed us, and they said something to the effect of, drop the ship, it's ours. We weren't going to drop the ship. We weren't going to give them the Constitution. We weren't going to, let them have this piece of hardware. I mean, presumably due to the fact that gasoline and other petroleum products were so scarce, the sailing ship was an immense prize, and I mean, it was. That's kind of why we were after it as well, but they had journeyed across an ocean to come and get it. They didn't, it was kind of a, it was not a situation of if we can't have it, nobody can, but one of the first things they did after we issued a negative response was crank around, come alongside. It was still a long shot, or at least it seemed like, because either they're not particularly accurate or it was a fairly long shot. Then again, these are smooth-bore cannons. They fired a broadside at us. They aimed it mostly at the MV Block Island, although the Constitution, I think, ricocheted one hit that did pretty much minimal damage. The MV Block Island, being, not armored at all, had some pretty serious dents, did not start to take on water from the first broadside or punch any holes or anything like that. It was all above the waterline anyways. So, we had really no way of exchanging shots. The Constitution was not in any shape to endure cannon fire, and we didn't have, it's not like they kept bags of gunpowder on board. We didn't have those kind of supplies. We had some cannonballs, didn't have any gunpowder. And nobody there knew how to use an 18th century muzzle-loading cannon. Or, even 19th century, whatever. It's, they're old guns. Or, well, they're replicas of old guns. So, we cranked it up. We cranked the MV Block Island to its maximum speed that it would allow, which normally would be 16.5 knots, but it turned out to be about 15. Constitution did not like this at all, and started taking on a little bit of water, but not enough to endanger the ship. The hull was being stressed by this. I mean, clearly, it was going to go in dry dock in 2 years, so it was a little worse for wear. But it was still usable as a ship. Yeah, we forced those engines into overdrive. Unfortunately for us, the wind was sweeping around. The wind was sweeping around and turned to the southwest, which was perfectly in line with the canal, which would have been good if we were running the Constitution on sail power. We weren't, obviously. So, they cranked off a couple more broadsides. We lost a little bit in the way of, the ability to draft. Or, we lost a little bit of hull integrity on the MV Block Island. We took on a little bit of water, but the pumps were handling it when we got into the canal. And that was at the point where they stopped being able to shoot at us. I'm not sure if they had bow chasers, but if they did, they weren't using them. Probably because they were going to damage the Constitution. Because the Constitution was behind us and they were behind it. So we had a pretty much straight shot. They had no problem chasing us, although they had to be kind of careful. And also the bridges in the canal. The bridges in the canal, for the most part, are not any taller than the drawbridge, and that's, I think, 135 feet, at least at high tide. And that's why we took the mast off the Constitution. Trincomalee is a lot shorter, so they didn't have as much of trouble, but I think when they went into the first bridge, they nicked their main mast. This sort of left them with a little trouble in the navigation department, but, not enough for them to do anything about it. I can't find any, what's the word? I can't find anything on the heights of the mast, the Trincomalee. So, well, let's see, Leda class. Nope, nothing. Alright. Yeah. Anyways, these guys, they could go about as fast as the Constitution, but despite us trying to push the MV Block Island to 15 knots, that was our max speed. That was not our continuous speed, and so they managed to catch up on the open sea with the wind with them. Of course, when we got into the canal, it didn't matter because they weren't shooting at us. They weren't really trying to do anything with us. See, what happened was, we got into the canal, and I was concerned about them being able to catch us when they got to the other side, and that was pretty much a given. And we were wondering what to do, and I sort of had the bright idea of to drop the bridge on them. I didn't really want to drop the bridge on them because, again, the Trincomalee's a piece of art, and I didn't want to damage the Trincomalee. Yeah, Trincomalee. So the ideal scenario was to, lower the bridge such that they couldn't get through, but give them enough time to get away from it. I wasn't sure if this was going to be feasible because of how close they were behind us, but they put a boat over the side of the Constitution, they put me in it, and I rowed to the west shore of the Cape Cod Canal, where there's the control booth for the Cape Cod Canal Railroad Bridge. Of course, the area did not have any power, so I get over to the booth, and there's no manual release down there. There's no power to activate the bridge's raising and lowering, and I'm only barely ahead of the Constitution at this point and the Block Island, and they're about to get in under the bridge. They slowed down, to allow me more time, and this sort of allowed them more time because the canal is, it's not tiny, but it's not wide. It's not, the Trincomalee was not trying to pass us at any point. or, try to come alongside. You really want to stay in the middle of that, because if you brush side, that's going to be it. And on top of that, the wind was doing all sorts of funny things, threatening to blow them into the wall and stuff like that. They were having trouble, thank goodness for us. But that didn't mean they weren't keeping up fairly well. I was all by myself at this point, but I figured I'd be on the right side, and then I could call the train to come and pick me up. Sure, why not? No, not at all. The manual release turned out to be at the top of the tower. It's a lift bridge, so it's got 2 towers on it, and the manual release was at the top of the tower. When I got to the shore, I had thankfully because I didn't swim, a non-waterlogged G17C, the same one that I started with, thankfully, and was able to take out the Zach that was in the booth, as well as one that was sort of milling around, but apparently the MV Block Island attracted a bunch of other ones, so they started coming out of the woodwork and coming out of the woods in the town nearby. I went to climb the bridge, and here's something that's important about the zombies. They're mostly really stupid, because they're fairly brainless. Like I said, I think... Did I say the thing about solanum preventing decomposition? It does, for the most part, because the virus that creates the zombies is fairly repulsive to normal decomposers, for the most part. So that's why zombies stick around instead of rotting into a pile of goo immediately. But every once in a while, you'll have one with some fairly higher order brain function, and there was one in particular that tried to follow me up the ladder. I figured easy pickings. Take the gun out again, look down at this thing past my feet, and go to pull the trigger, and like an idiot, drop the gun. It tumbles down, it strikes my shoe, and it bounces into the Cape Cod Canal, and that was the end of my first pistol. So now I'm screwed just altogether. I get to the top. The manual release was a pain, but it worked. It came undone with a pretty big bang, but allegedly, or apparently, you're supposed to do it at the same time as the other one. I didn't expect the thing to start moving until I got rid of both of them, but one side of the bridge started descending, before the other one. And I went, 2 things. I went, oh crap, that means I've got to hit the one on the other side, and oh crap, it's going to fall on the MV Block Island and the Constitution. This thing started going, reached maximum tension, and stopped. It's crooked. They had to juke to the other side of the channel to avoid the bridge. Meanwhile, I, still being sort of chased by a smart zombie, smart is relative, jumped down onto the bridge deck, pulled myself across because it wasn't running, it wasn't flat, it was sort of like going upstairs on the ties. Climbed onto the other tower, got up there, released the second clamp, and then hopped back onto the bridge to ride it down. In hindsight, I should not have ridden it down, because the bridge made a lot of noise, a bunch of zombies came out of the east side, but the Trincomalee, thankfully, was, completely... they were on the ball. They dropped an anchor when they saw the bridge coming down. It caught them, it spun them around in the channel, but it caught them, and it kept them from running into the bridge. They were obviously not happy about the bridge thing, but I was happy that they didn't wreck their boat. I saw the other guys in Quonset, and we made up, but I'll continue that next time. Train Man out.